Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to another video. I know it's been a while since I've made a video, but I'm super stoked to be back. In this one, we're going to be showing you how I went from this photo here and took it to this photo here. We're going to be going through the entire Lightroom and Photoshop process, from coloring the photo with my presets to essentially removing the annoying car on the side there, as well as showing you how I did this blur effect in Photoshop. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. Here we are inside Lightroom. Now I'm just going to show you, this is the before image right here. We're just going to increase the exposure so you can kind of see the image and exactly what we're going to be working with. So first thing we're going to be doing is coloring this image. So what I did is just use my presets. So the coloring behind this is very simple. The important part that I want you guys to pay attention to is the Photoshop part, where we're actually going to be using certain techniques to be removing this car, as well as duplicating these buildings and doing that super cool blur effect. First, we're going to come over to our presets, and I'll just hide these. We don't need these. And I'm just going to use my bold preset here. Now, I like the start already. We're just going to add a mask around our subject so we can kind of make her pop a little bit from the background. Now, in order to do this, we're going to come up to our masking tool. And in the new Lightroom, I already have this done. I'm just going to delete these masks here. We're going to click on our masking tool and we're going to go to select subject. So this is a new tool inside of Lightroom Classic. So super awesome tool, does a pretty good job at selecting the subject. Sometimes it misses, you can kind of see here, but overall it does a pretty good job. Now I'm not going to worry too much about the miss here. Now you can of course go in and clean up these masks, and I do recommend that. But what we're going to be doing is just increasing our shadows ever so slightly, and you'll notice once you start changing values, your red mask will go away and it'll automatically start applying the changes. And we're also going to just increase our exposure just a little bit. Now that looks pretty good to me. And another thing I like to do when I increase the exposure and shadows on our subject is actually decrease the exposure of the entire image as a whole. So we're just going to do that, just drag our exposure down ever so slightly, make the background a little bit darker, and it kind of makes it feel just a little bit more moody with a little bit of pop on our subject. So now what we're going to do is do a little bit more color work, and we're going to bring this into Photoshop. So let's just scroll down here. One thing I do like to do with this preset is just drag this down ever so slightly and make more of a rounded curve in the shadows. The reason for that is I'm always looking at this graph up here, and you can see that our shadows are pretty cut off. So I want to just make that a little bit less. About there is good for me, and we'll go with that for now. So under our saturation, this is where I'm going to change a few values. We're going to just adjust our greens. I like to just grab them and literally do this side to side to see what exactly it's changing in our image. There's no greens in this one, so we'll rip those out. Aquas, same thing, very, very subtle. We're going to pull those out. Now the blues, I know there's going to be a lot of blue in our image, as you can see. Now if you want this fully desaturated look here with a little bit of the blues, you can actually rip these out for the most part. Now what I actually like to do is keep some of the blues here. We're going to keep them about there. We're actually going to bring this into Photoshop, and we're going to rip those out inside Photoshop. So we're going to right click on our image, edit in, Photoshop 2022, yeah. Anyways, we've got our photo open here in Photoshop. And first thing I like to do in Photoshop is just resize it. The reason for this is, just unlock our layer here. The reason for this is that sometimes doing specific changes inside Photoshop on the full size document, as you can see, if we just come up to image size, bring this over here. It is stalling on my other screen. This photo is 4,900 pixels, which is way too big for Instagram. So if this is going on Instagram, I recommend we just change this to 2000. Now, personally, I like to work at 2000 for a couple of reasons. Some people work at 1350, which is the exact size in height that you want for Instagram. But the reason I do 2000 is because it also kind of doubles as a wallpaper. If you do decide to, for whatever reason, put this on your story as a wallpaper, you've got the full size image. That's basically 1920 by 1080 because it does the crop automatically. So that's kind of my thought process behind this 2000. We're going to hit OK. And we're just going to hit Z on our keyboard and bring this up, make that bigger. Now, first thing we're going to be doing is add a hue and saturation. So I like to do this and rip the blues out from here. So the reason I like to do this is Lightroom, let's go back to Lightroom for a second, hit Y on our keyboard. Lightroom is looking at all these adjustments and comparing it to the adjustments you can pull from your raw image. Now, when you actually right-click and open it in Photoshop, Photoshop is now looking at this image as if it was the raw image, if that makes sense. Now, this is, of course, brought in as a TIFF file, which brings in tons of data. So you basically do have the flexibility of a camera raw, but not entirely as if it was an ARW file. I hope that makes sense. But essentially, when we bring this into Photoshop, now it's looking at this as the base file. So when we actually do go into our colors here and manipulate these values, you'll notice that now when I change the scions, there's a lot more cyan in the there's a lot more cyan in the photo than when I was changing the scions in Lightroom. So we can actually rip those out completely, and you can kind of get just a different look and feel. Now, I do this pretty much with all my photos when it comes to the blues. The blues, in my opinion, are the hardest thing for me to get consistent. So being able to do this in Photoshop gives me just that extra level of control, which is why I do it. All right, so the first thing we're going to be doing here is removing this car. Now, this is a rather tedious process, but we're going to be using a couple of different tools and techniques that I've learned in order to remove this car. Now, is it going to be a bit of a butch process? Potentially, but that's okay because we're in Photoshop here, and the rules behind Photoshop is it doesn't have to be perfect as long as it sells the illusion. Now, luckily, what we're removing here is actually blurred out. As you can see, it's bokeh, so it's a little bit easier. Now, we're going to go in here. First step, we're going to actually come over to our polygon lasso tool, and we're just going to mask roughly around the car. So the idea here is to get a very basic content aware fill. Content aware will not do the trick for you, but we can kind of mess with some settings and get a good foundation for this car. So we'll just go like that. We're going to go right click content aware fill, and that will bring it up here. Now you can see it is sampling from her since she's all green. So anything essentially in green on this left side here is what the software is using to sample the images inside here, or the pixels, I should say. So if I click on her head, now it's not sampling her head. And with that one click, by telling it not to sample this area, we were actually able to get a much more cleaner result than we had initially. So if I just hit Control Z, you'll see that it's duplicating her face, and now it is not. So we can kind of just click around and see if we can get a relatively oh, that is actually very good right there. So essentially what you do is you just want to click around on the things that should not be in that area and deselect it from sampling and try and get the cleanest looking result that you can within our content aware. Now that looks pretty damn good right there. And another thing you can do is come up and check our scale. Now this sometimes works, sometimes it does not. In this case, it does not. I find scale does work very well in some situations, especially when you have to use content aware on things like bricks or something that has a repeating pattern. Then I find the scale is just absolutely perfect. So we're just gonna hit OK on this. And that did a very good job at removing that car. So now what we're gonna do is just kind of sample some areas and just kind of fill in some of these jankiness here. So we're gonna just shift select our two layers here. We're going to hit Control J to duplicate them, and we're just going to merge these layers. Right click merge layers, just so we have a fresh layer to work on when we are duplicating things around here. So what we're going to do actually is just hide our layers here. Actually, okay, that does a pretty good job. What we're going to do, we're going to click back. We're going to click back on our layer we just made, and we're going to duplicate this area here and see if we can kind of get a nice stamp right there. So what we're going to do is come up to our clone stamp tool. We're going to hit Alt to sample this area. So as you can see, now the clone stamp tool, if we use our bracket keys, we can make it bigger. It's kind of just copying that area. And we're going to try and stamp it and just kind of see if we can complete this thing going on right here. Something like that. And maybe grab here and just kind of stamp there. There we go. So now, as you can see, it looks like we just kind of got a crosswalk that goes right across here. So looks pretty good in my opinion. Now, another thing we're going to quickly do, just small changes to this image. We're going to remove these handlebars here. These handlebars are not very pleasing. So we're just going to quickly lasso tool around them. Now, something like this, your content aware fill is going to do a great job. So we're just going to hit OK. And another thing that I did to this image was actually remove some of this bike. So how I did that is we're first going to just grab these two layers. Every time you use content aware fill, it's going to make a new layer. We're going to merge these layers so we have one layer. And now what we're going to do is go up to our marquee tool. We're going to make a rather generous selection here. Now, keep in mind with this technique, do not select anything you don't want stretched. So if your subject is slightly inside this, Photoshop will do the best not to stretch your subject, but it's never perfect. And we just want to remove some of this bike. So we're going to come over to Edit, Content Aware Scale. We're going to hold Shift and just drag that out ever so slightly about there. Just kind of, you know what, actually we're just going to do it a little bit more and just make sure we have this building go completely off the page right there. And it looks pretty good to me. Actually, what we're going to do, I think I'm going to just go right here, and just so we don't stretch this truck too much, I did notice this truck is getting like absolutely destroyed. So we're going to go a little bit less. So when we stretch that out, now we don't have to worry too much. Okay, and we don't have to worry too much about these buildings either because they're all going to be blurred, which is what we're going to be doing now. So first thing we need to do is actually do a duplication. So as you can see inside Lightroom, we have the same pattern happening on the other side. Now, how do we do that? We're going to actually duplicate this pattern here. So we're going to come over to our brush tool and we're just going to do a rather rough lasso selection like so. And we're going to hit Control J. We're now going to hit Control T, right click, horizontal, and we're going to drag that over here. And I think we're going to move this up just a little bit because I kind of have them off center. As you can see here, this one's a bit up, this one's down, and something about here looks good. Right click, or sorry, Control T, we're just going to make it a little bit bigger and hit Enter. So now we're going to make a mask. So come down here, make a mask. We're going to hit B on our keyboard for our brush tool. Bracket tool to make this bigger. Make sure we're set to black because black makes pixels disappear in our mask. And we're just going to come in here and kind of make sure right click, just hardness 0. And we're just going to kind of come in here and essentially fix up that edge and just blend this in a little bit. Now it doesn't have to be perfect, of course, because this is all going to be blurred, but this looks pretty good to me. Maybe just bring this over like that. Looks good. And I think that looks cool. So now what we're going to do is our blur. So this is the fun part here. We're actually going to do the same thing we did with our first two layers. Just grab our new layers, Control J, and we're going to right click merge them so they are one layer. Now we're going to come out to our selection tool, and just like we had selected a second ago, we're going to now select this side as well as the new side. And something right there. Don't worry too much about your selection being perfect because we're going to be duplicating this and we're going to be able to push and pull the actual blur effect to kind of get it to fit perfectly. But what I'm going to do is just come down here, and what we're going to do is Control J. Now what that's going to do, as you can see over here, is it actually creates, Control I will just invert it to show you a visual example. It creates a new layer of your selection. So with that selected, we're actually going to come up here to Filter, Blur. Actually, sorry, first what we're going to do is right click, Convert to Smart Object, because we want our blur to be a smart blur where we can edit it if needed in the future. Now we're going to come to Blur, Blur Gallery, and we are going to go to Path Blur, one of my favorite blurs. So you can see this arrow here. This arrow controls the direction of your blur. So as we increase the speed, you'll notice that it is also increasing the blur effect. Now the cool thing about using path blur over your motion blur is you have this thing called taper and center and endpoint speed. So 3 settings here. What taper does is it literally tapers the blur, so it makes it so much more realistic, which is 100% why I use this over any other blur technique. And then we also have center blur. So what this does is essentially centers the blur kind of like motion blur does, where if you have one line, it'll evenly stretch it on both sides. If we uncheck this, you'll notice now that if we have one line, it only stretches the one side. And we can actually control this further with our endpoint speed. If we just check this, it kind of gives us these little red arrows to show. This one here is very short, and you can actually control the level of sort of trail you want your blur to be stretched. So really cool, lots of control that you have. So we're just going to hit Control Z here. Control Z, Control Z, Control Z, Control. Okay, we're gonna hit cancel. And we're just gonna open this back up, blur gallery, path blur. And what we're gonna do is grab our arrow here. We're gonna edit these, grab our arrow here, make this 90 degrees. We're gonna grab a decent amount of speed, uncheck our center, and taper it. Now taper, maybe about there. Now I used quite a bit of blur here, as you can see. So something like this looks pretty solid to me. Now you can of course come in here and edit your taper or your end speed if you want. It's totally up to you. The nice thing about this path blur is you just have so much control that you can really sit here and kind of play with the settings. You also have these cool strobe effects that you can add that sort of do this like tiling effect. It's really cool. You can increase your strobe flashes. Tons of settings that you can change here in this effect. So we're just gonna lower our strobe strength down again. Just have it like here. I don't even remember the default. Anyways, we're gonna hit OK. We've been playing around with these for long enough. And there you have it, guys. There's pretty much your blur effect. So what we're gonna do now, let me see here. So what we're gonna do now, I want to actually duplicate this effect. No, we're gonna create a mask. So we're actually gonna just kind of mask out the areas here. So as you can see, we kind of don't have it affecting our truck or anything down here. It almost feels like it's pulling from those locations. So we're just going to come back into here and adjust that as well. Now, one thing I am noticing is, so if we go, we can delete these inverts. Not sure what those are doing. Can't right click. Delete smart filter, delete, okay. We can go back into our blur. Now, one thing I did notice is this building here does not look like it's blurring at all, to be honest. I think I see why. Sorry, I'm just kind of group these, see what we did here. Okay, I see what happened. Okay, I see. So for some reason, it didn't get this building completely, which is okay. We're just going to redo it. Just like that. Looks good. Control J, grab our smart filter. I'm curious if you can even do this. Oh, I don't know what I did, but okay. So we just dragged our smart filter. I literally just clicked here. Let me just make sure that what I did is right here. Control C. Control V. Okay, yeah. So I just clicked here, clicked on this, Control C, and then clicked here, Control V, and then we're just going to hide that. Now, this obviously doesn't look correct. We're going to go into our filter here, see what's going on. All right, we're just going to delete that. Oh. All right, I see what's happening here. You get back up there. Okay, Control C, Control V. No, Control V. Okay, Control V. Okay, bring this back up. There we go. Okay, that looks better. I'm not sure why this isn't blurring completely, but that's all right. Anyways, we're gonna move on for the sake of this tutorial. You can kind of push and pull with your masks as needed. This is literally just a masking issue, so just make sure your selections are proper. But for time's sake, we do not have time to necessarily go into that. We're almost at 20 minutes here, and I want to kind of wrap this up. So what we're gonna do now is just fix this blur at the bottom. We're gonna come down here to our masking tool, brush, and we're just going to make sure it's set to black. And actually we're gonna use a little bit of a harder brush and just kind of come in here and remove the effect from down here. And I think what you can also do, just see if we merge these layers. So now we have this like this, filter, blur gallery. So I think I did double blur it. I'm trying to remember exactly what I did last time, but I can see that it's not, still doesn't even want to blur this top piece here. But anyways, okay. So what we're going to do now that we have our blurs going on, what we're going to do is our last effect before I kind of added any dust overlays and whatnot. So we're just going to just right click on these, shift click on our two layers, Control J, right click, merge layers, so we have them all on one layer. And what we are going to do here, I'm just going to delete this to keep it a little bit cleaner for you. What we are going to do here, what was I going to do? Oh yeah, what I'm going to do here. So now what I like to do with a lot of my photos is add this effect called the Orion effect. Now I actually saw this one on YouTube by a creator named Lucan, I believe. I'll put his Instagram tag on the screen for you, so you can go check out his videos. But essentially what this effect does is adds a really nice bloom to the highlights. So I'd like to take this just one step further. And how do we do that? We're essentially going to go to oh, so it's these two here that we need. Control J. Oh my God, I'm a mess today. We need in order to do this effect, you need an actual layer that has. So if I turn all these off, but final layer with all of your adjustments on it needs to be actually created. So what we're gonna do, duplicate that layer. Control J, image, apply image. We're gonna go to just default settings, copy everything you see here. Sorry, it was on my other screen. Hit OK. Normal. We're gonna go to screen, and we're gonna go to filter, blur, Gaussian blur. Now, personally, I like to do around 14, but you can kind of see that as you increase the strength of your blur, it will increase the strength of this effect. So I like to do around 14. Just hit OK. Now how I take this a little bit further than what we saw, what you would initially see in his tutorial, where he kind of stops here, is I actually like to mask this to only my highlights. So how do I do that? We're going to click on our original layer. We're going to come over to filter. We're going to select color range. Bring this over here. Now under our selection, we're going to hit this drop down and go to highlights. And now we're going to increase our fuzziness. We want something. So essentially everything that's white is going to still have this effect attached to it, and everything that is black is not, because that is in shadow. So we want to be a little bit generous, not too generous, because I do notice that if you're kind of too conservative with this effect and you do something like, oh, I only want the highlights and it looks kind of just like this, it really doesn't show up as much. So you want something that's more, bring up the fuzziness maybe around this sort of selectional ballpark to get the results you're going to want. So we'll just hit OK. And of course, make sure our Orion layer is selected. And we're going to hit our mask. Now what that's going to do is create a selection mask out of everything that was selected. So if we just toggle this, you'll see that we get a really nice kind of color pop in the whites. And in order to take this a step further, what I like to do is, since I don't really want it affecting our road or anything, we're actually going to click on this layer below, come over to our selection tool, and we're just going to come over and select the road, and just hitting Alt to unselect her, like so. Looks good. Now with our, make sure our mask layer is selected, our brush tool, and we're just going to paint out this effect. Now, this pedal's a little bit annoying. How do we get rid of it? We're just going to rough selection around it, right click, content aware fill, and that should, of course, get rid of it very quickly. Now, that looks pretty good. This is pretty much the end result. Now, I, of course, went in and added some overlay effects to it and whatnot. Now, I know the colors are a little bit different. I think I might have used an old preset on this one. I'm just going to, I might have used one of these presets and then edited it. But either way, this one's, I think it was actually this preset. But the techniques that we used in Photoshop were all the same. This is actually an older preset that I've not really using as much anymore. I find this kind of pushes the colors just a little bit into the realm of not quite real, if that makes sense. But as you can see, see how it has these blues in the shadows? If I just right click, edit in Photoshop, you can see that I can actually have so much more control in pulling out these blues inside Photoshop. Like cyans, pull them out, blues, pull them out. And now you have kind of a more realistic look to the colors that were going on in this one here. So guys, that is it for this video. I hope you learned a lot. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe for more content. I'm hoping to kind of release a little bit more editing tutorials for you guys. I really enjoy editing photos, especially stuff like this where I get to push them kind of past the realm of reality. So if you stuck around this long, thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you in the next one.